This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Beginning today's show is Dan O'Brien, K-State grain economist, with this week's grain market update for Kansas. He also explores what is predicted from USDA's upcoming WASDE Report. Kansas Secretary of Agriculture Mike Bain continues the show as he previews the upcoming Governor's Summit on ag growth. We're also joined by USDA's Bain and Brad Rippey to discuss their recent wildfires in Hawaii. Chip Redmond, K-State meteorologist, rounds out this week's shows with an outlook on the weather. Certain places in Kansas are no longer in a drought. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Friday show, as we always do, with a grain market update. And we're joined with K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien for that update. Dan, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Shelby. Appreciate it.
Starting off our conversation of what are futures looking like, Dan?
Well, give a little bit of a preface to that in that, each week as we talk on these things, it's just such momentous, important times. And we're in the midst of determining the size of the corn. First, the corn crop, mostly in July, and now the August crop. And the futures markets have been reflecting general optimism on the size of those crops. And you see that in the Dees corn close yesterday at $4.96 and a quarter. Really, the important number there is $5, i.e. it's below $5, and that with the USDA reports, one in just a few minutes at 11 o'clock today, and then the next one on September 12th, and October, November, and then January after that. So we're in the midst of getting new crop information from the USDA, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But again, that is below $5, closing at $4.96 a quarter yesterday for Dees is indicative of the market not greatly worried about the size of the corn crop. I think there's still questions that to be answered, but that's there. For soybeans, we've seen soybeans now at November closed at yesterday at $13.18 and a quarter. Also, not $14, not $15, but $13, and so that's also indicative of a market that's not panicking. And I would think when we look at Kansas City hard red winter wheat, the hard red crop's pretty well harvested, almost all harvested, at least in Kansas. And so the September contract, $7.67. Again, we're seeing that below $8. Generally, I don't know that you can say we've had a tremendous crop, but there are enough other things happening around the world, and some wheat sounding like it's been brought into the U.S. to mitigate price rallies. So you have all that in play. And I would say from a technical or charting point of view, that corn on the September contract, we've again closed yesterday about 483. We had been down to about 472 within the last basically month or so. So we're getting down to areas that if we go below, and the impetus, if we have large crops come out of these reports, we could go lower than that. Then we really have to reassess. Are we looking at 450 to 475, or just where we go for corn? For the soybean situation, again, we've closed at 1350 for the September contract. 1352 yesterday, a little bit, about 30-40 cents higher than the November contract. But again, general tight situation in the world. Well, I guess I step back a second. When the U.S. lowered our acreage, 4 million acres made a big impact on the size of our crop, and we have recently closed down about 1330 or so for that September contract. Historically, we'd gotten as low as about a $1.30 or $1.40. So if anything, soybeans have really held up at a little bit better in all of this than corn has. But again, we'll see what the final numbers come out with in these reports that we have in hand.
And so what is the cash prices looking like in Kansas?
Generally, all the cash prices at the elevators that we look at are elevator locations. For wheat, we're lowest price in Northwest Kansas, $6.92 is the highest bid in the region yesterday. Around the Salina, Topeka, and Hutchinson area, you'd seen highs of about $7.42, $7.51 in those regions. $7.17 in Garden City and Columbus, $7.23. So, again, post-harvest. here we are and have moved to that situation. Soybeans all running about the top prices running from about 1307 to about 1365. That's 1365 actually in Hutchinson. So again, more of an export oriented bid, no doubt. Grain sorghum bids. You do have a couple bids in the state, in Columbus and Colby, the two polar opposite ends, from southeast to northwest, above $5 for cash. 508 in Columbus, 503 in Colby is in that region. 508, also in Topeka, and really sticking around 490, 495, something in most of the rest of the state. The corn numbers still have a premium. It's interesting that Garden City cash basis still above $1 above the futures at 583, 563 in Colby, so 80 over, 543 in Topeka, 60 over, about 546. Hutchinson, Salina, 514, 548. So these aren't bad historic prices. These are actually historically very good prices, but they are off the highs that we'd seen appreciably in recent months. And no doubt farmers, sellers would like to see those numbers higher, and buyers are looking forward to being able to buy at more of a moderate price for either ethanol plants, livestock feeders, or you name it.
Dan, you indicated earlier that the WASDE report will be coming out shortly. When we wrap, it will be coming out at 11. And so kind of seeing some indications or what you're expecting to see there.
As you and I talked before we came on the air, this is an important report. The USDA has gotten input from farmers via surveys and probably used some satellite data and some of their crop condition ratings to come up with a number. But in the September report, which will be released on September the 12th, measuring September 1 conditions, that's when the USDA actually goes out in the field. So this report coming up here today will certainly be important, give us an idea of sentiments, but we'll have better information, be farther along in the crop in the September report than this August report. All that said, first thing you look at, size of the crop. Pre-report trade estimates are for the size of the U.S. corn crop to be projected by the USDA to be about 15.135 billion bushels. That'd be down about about 85 million from the July report. Again, acknowledging some crop damage in some dry areas. For soybeans, we projected in July, soybean crop this year be about 4.3 billion, projecting about 54 million bushels less than that. Corn yields, interesting. 177 was the July projection for U.S. corn average yield, 175.5 for this August report. So we'll see. And watchers of that report will see on the first tick, they're probably looking right at this number. What the USDA project for corn yields and production and for soybeans. And if there's a lot of change, the first impetus in the market will be to react. Could be in a pretty convulsive manner if their number's not far from that. So with that, you take the production numbers for corn, soybeans, and grain sorghum, et cetera, for wheat in Kansas, and then you look to what the USDA is projecting for ending stocks. And for the most part, for this 2023-24 marketing year, starting September 1 for corn and soybeans, started already for wheat. Wheat started on June 1st. You don't see a lot of changes projected. The one place for corn, you do see that about 80 million bushel reduction in estimated production showing up in the ending stocks, them being down about 94 million, down from 2.262 in July down to 2.168. And you see the soybean number projected to be down for ending stock down to 267 million. We were at 300 million in July. So it is as it is. We'll be watching the production and the ending stocks numbers domestically and seeing where things go. We'll also have a whole raft of wheat by class projections. It'll be the national and the other. Hard red spring up in a dry area was projected at 479 million bushels production in July. 477 is the pre-report estimate for August. I think that one's probably the most at risk, that and the white wheat number, because they're up in those northern areas. Drought could be getting to them. So I guess I would wonder about that being the most at risk area. And they have the world numbers as well. And frankly, those world numbers right now, they'll probably follow pretty closely to what's either happening in the U.S. or in South America. I would say though, beyond this, gosh, all you have to do is watch the ag wire and see all this stuff happening all over the world in these ag production areas. More floods in China, issues that are unsettling in the Black Sea area. There was a news release that it's almost was designed to cause market volatility, where I believe it was a Soviet minister said to watch out for major disruptions in the grain market. Well, gracious, I think isn't that what we've been having out of that part of the world? And he's saying it's going to get worse. So anyway, we'll approach these USDA numbers with requisite attention that they deserve, but knowing that on the supply, especially demand side, there are just a whole lot of questions that have to be answered yet, and anything but surety going forward.
Overall, did you really see any big surprises there with the predictions that are expected to come out? Probably
from my hard red winter wheat perspective, that there's not more expectation of a shortfall in the northern wheat crops. Again, they're dry and have had issues up in those areas. So I would wonder about that. I'll be watching the Canadian wheat production number and some of their other oil seeds that they produce, canola and the like, to see what those come out with. So I think just as we kind of started off our section with here, it's quite possible that if we get large numbers and they're confirmed, and not just in the August report, but we get in the September report, then we would have to say that, well, gosh, some of our riskiness is going out of the market. And then I wouldn't say we become defensive, but we'd be very watchful about the possibility of things moving sideways to lower in coming months and in the corn and maybe the soybean markets.
Dan, I appreciate taking the time to join us today and giving us our grain market update.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Shelby.
That was K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien. I will link the WASDE report that will be coming out today in today's show notes, which you can find on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be back with more ahead. You're tuned into Agriculture Today, and we continue our Friday show now, discussing the Governor's Summit on Ag Growth. And then to talk about it, we have Kansas Secretary of Agriculture, Mike Beam. Mike, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you for this opportunity.
The Governor's Summit on Ag Growth coming up pretty quickly. What can participants expect?
Well, this is the 8th annual summit, and like those in the past, this is an opportunity for anyone who has an involvement in some sector of agriculture to gather, meet other people, renew acquaintances, and have a discussion about what are challenges that we identify to growing agriculture even more in this state.
Sounds like a place a lot of people coming together to talk about a few different issues. And what's on the docket for this year?
Well, this year we're going to put more focus on two challenges that all of our stakeholders have been identifying at previous summits and in other meetings and agricultural trade groups. But the primary focus will be on water and workforce. I call it W square. So we're going to have a couple presenters that will kind of set the stage on those topics, and then we'll spend a good portion of our time in work sessions with attendees addressing those, teasing that out some and seeing if there's collectively a couple or more action items that we can go forth with to address these big challenges.
Will there be an opportunity then for attendees to kind of give some input back to you guys?
Absolutely. That after the two presenters, we go to break sessions, and they'll be facilitated by our staff. And yes, that's the time where individuals will have the opportunity to maybe react to some ideas that others are bringing forward, or organically just talk about, this is an observation that I've had, or if we collectively could work on this. And most of it will probably be focused on what the state can or should do, but I think a lot of these issues will be what can we do collectively, the private sector, other agencies, trade groups, with the state of Kansas. So usually anything that's as big an item as water and workforce is going to involve a collaboration of many people.
Especially right now, water is so different across the whole state. So really a lot of minds coming together.
Yes, and it'd be interesting to see how the discussions go with water because, we have a lot of applications every year in our Division of Water Resources for new water permits in the eastern part of the state. And then as you look towards the central and western part where it's predominantly, use of groundwater, those issues are quite different. And I think there's been a lot of focus on what's the future of the High Plains Aquifer. And, in some areas it's obvious that there's not many years left to being able to use the water at the level that we have. And I think, hopefully we'll have some discussion. I don't know if there'll be how much new information, but it's an awareness that, how can we continue to make these regions of the state, really strong economic drivers in agriculture and the value-added aspect. At the same time, get our water use at a more sustainable level.
Mentioned just two big topics, water and workforce, so no sector meetings at this Ag Growth Summit.
No, I think there will be a few people that might gather right ahead of it, but we've encouraged and we've helped with our staff gather some of the sectors in advance. They've had, I think, some virtual meetings, maybe even in person, and I think there may be a sector or two that's going to meet afterwards. But we have 7 years of feedback and documentation on a sector-by-sector basis, so we've been working ahead of the summit to update those, and we will, encourage and help if we need to have follow-up sector meetings.
And so this is taking place on August 17th. However, the day before is on August 16th is the Ag Growth Social.
So that's seemed to be quite popular. People like to, get together. We're getting towards the end of summer. Fall is close by, and it seems like this is the time of year that people have been busy, maybe on the farm or ranch or in their other lives. And so it just has been very popular. So we'll have that starting at 6 o'clock the night before. This is, of course, all at the Hilton Garden Inn here in Manhattan.
It's coming up soon, a little less than a week now, but why should people take the time to attend the Ag Growth Summit?
Well, we think, and the feedback that I've received from those attendees is they like the collective discussions with various sectors. It's not just one sector getting together. And I know there's people that walk away with a chance to meet people that they may have heard about, they may have talked to them on the phone, but so they can visit with them in person and get to see their staff of the various agencies, see the staff of Department of Ag, and hopefully hear from some speakers that provide some new information.
Mike, what makes you excited to attend the Kansas Ag Growth Summit?
Well, I always get excited when I see people walk in the door, people that I've had the privilege of getting to know for the past 40 years in my various roles in my career. So that's always exciting. And people, especially those in agriculture, are very upbeat and positive, and that's to me is one of the highlights. And then watching people react and get engaged, that's also is rewarding for me.
We've talked about the day happening August 17th, but what does that day look like?
We start out with just a few introductions. We're going to start fairly fast-paced. We start at 8 a.m., and I and the president of the State Board of Agriculture, Thad Geigert, will give a very brief welcome, and then Governor Kelly will address the crowd in a welcome. All that, is in the first, 15, 20 minutes of the session. And then we'll go right into the featured speakers, which would be Nathan Hendricks here at Kansas State University, talking about the economics of water, the value of that water in Kansas. And then we'll work towards hearing from Chuck Connor, who's with the National Cooperatives out of D.C., but Chuck also chairs the Agricultural Workforce Coalition. And so he'll provide his insights into what all these organizations that have identified workforce, what are they doing on the legislative front? What's the chance of getting some changes made, and how can we help and support that effort?
happening August 17th on a Thursday in the Manhattan Conference Center. Do attendees need to register for this event?
It's not absolutely essential, but highly recommended. It's always a difficult and dicey challenge as to giving our guarantee for meals, and so it helps to have that count. And, of course, we can get our name badges made up in advance. So we would strongly encourage people to do that. They can go on our website and just go to agriculture.ks.gov, the website. You can Google Kansas Department of Ag, and I think the very front page gets you a link to the information about the summit and how to register.
And this is also a free event for attendees, correct?
It is. It is a free event. And we've also have considerable help and support from some sponsors, which we hope to highlight that day.
Mike, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and sharing with us some information about the Governor's Summit on Ag Growth.
My pleasure.
That was Kansas Secretary of Agriculture Mike Bain discussing the Governor's Summit on Ag Growth that is taking place in Manhattan, Kansas on Thursday, August 17th at the Manhattan Conference Center. It is free to attend, but they do ask you register. The day before that on August 16th is the Ag Growth Social, which is also taking place in Manhattan. You can find more information about these events by going to agriculture.ks.gov. I will link that web address in today's show notes, which you can find on agtoday.net. Before we cut to our break, we're going to be joined by USDA's Bain and USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey as they discuss this week's wildfires on two of Hawaii's islands.
Certainly in modern times, this is by far and away the worst Hawaiian wildfire disaster we have seen.
With USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey noting the West Maui wildfire in particular, which destroyed the historic community of Lahaina and led to dozens of fatalities. One of several fires and hotspots on the islands of Maui and the Big Island of Hawaii that remain as of Thursday.
Nobody really saw this Hawaiian situation coming. I think looking in retrospect, you can kind of go back and figure out some of the causes of all this.
Contributors to the fires include lingering chronic drought conditions on Maui, invasive grasses growing after a wet season and more prone to burning, and the combination of a high-pressure system and Category 4 Hurricane Dora in the South Pacific, creating higher winds through the Hawaiian island chain.
We don't know yet the cause of any of these fires. Whatever the case, the fire started from a spark, rapidly spread in those winds.
I'm Ron Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Once again, that was U.S. Department of Agriculture's Rod Bain, and he was joined by USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey, and they were discussing factors that contributed to this week's wildfires on two of Hawaii's islands that led to several fatalities and the destruction of a historic community. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but when we come back, we'll be joined by Kansas State University meteorologist Chip Redmond with this week's weather update. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Friday show with a weather update with Key State meteorologist Chip Redmond. Chip, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We've had some moisture this past week.
Yeah, it's been an eventful week for a lot of folks. We had heaviest rain in central Kansas, with some areas seeing over 3 inches of rain, and a lot of that came pretty darn quickly. And then we had multiple rounds of storms that hit the Northwest, especially, with at least 3 rounds of storms over the last 7 days. That brought needed moisture, not any flooding or anything to that extent in that area, but it helped, especially after those 100-degree days, to really offset some of that heat and put some more moisture in the soil. Unfortunately, a lot of that fell a little too late for summer crops, about the right time for sorghum, I suppose, but corn, it was too late, and soybeans might be too late as well.
At the beginning of summer, we talked quite a bit about El Nino and kind of seeing if it was going to come, but maybe seeing a bit of it now in August.
Yeah, we continue to honestly see a really influential El Nino, which is just so impressive for it just starting and for the time of year that we just don't see El Nino impacts in the summer across the Central Plains, and we have. We've got a lot of upper-level winds that are helping organize these thunderstorms as they move east and keeping there are enough wind shear to create severe weather and to create organized precipitation events that track across the state. And even a lot of these severe weather events have started in Colorado in heavy rain and tracked across northwest into south central Kansas and then off to the east, and they're going all the way to the Atlantic, which is you get following that jet stream almost perfectly, which is enhanced by that El Nino. Seeing some drought monitor improvements then? Yeah, we had some drought monitor improvements, mostly in the northwest, where they saw repeated moisture round after round. And then, unfortunately, on the counter side of that, the Flint Hills didn't see a lot of that moisture. They did after the cutoff, but keep in mind the drought monitor cutoff is 7 a.m. on Tuesday, that they saw drought degradation in that area by 1 class in the Flint Hills. So we still have areas of exceptional drought in the west central and then south central. And then most of the state is in some sort of drought category, except for the western along the Colorado border and southwest, where they are drought-free still. And something I didn't think we'd be saying is there's actually some places that need to dry out. Yeah, the southwest that's drought-free that we just talked about has had drying out, thankfully. But now areas to the north and east of that, so basically northwest Kansas into central Kansas, probably could use some drier days with that 3+ inches of rain and multiple rounds of storms. And folks don't really need to get in the field per se, but I know some folks have really struggled to get hay up, for example, just because they keep getting moisture. And so we could really use some drier conditions for them. And we've had some cooler temperatures in the past, but maybe moving into a little bit more normal or average temperatures now. Yeah, we had that really impressive warm start to August, and then we followed it up with much cooler conditions. Now, as we kind of look to the future, we'll have a couple days that'll be warmer than normal, like today on Friday, and then probably again mid next week. But then we'll also have a few days that are cooler than normal. So overall average temperatures, our temperatures are starting to fall off each week as we kind of get in the downswing of summer. And then we're also seeing precipitation averages drop off a little bit slowly as we get through the end of summer as well. So precipitation-wise, we expect every 2 to 3 days we'll see a chance of storms as we get these waves that are in that jet stream, bring some of that monsoonal moisture to the east. And that'll allow mostly focused precipitation in areas of western and northeast Kansas. We're getting some rain, maybe getting a little bit more, have a little bit more average, so not as hot temperatures. However, those really hot temperatures we had in the past, we're seeing the impacts now. Yeah, we are. Just looking around and traveling the state this week, definitely saw a lot of corn that had browned out and burned up. And I've heard a lot of reports of soybeans losing leaves. And so just a really stressful time, and you can see it, the trees here just around town, there's a lot of browning going on. And that heat was just timed just right, and it was long enough to be quite impactful. The good news is, looking out into the future, we don't see any anticipation of any prolonged substantial heat. There is still heat to our south in Texas, and so when we look at that area in the future, we're going to watch it in case that ridge starts to build back north again. And it's not out of the question. We can have usually a pretty warm September, and overall, we should be more normal. Chip, I appreciate you joining us once again this week and giving us a weather update. Thanks for having me. That was Key State meteorologist Chip Redmond. That's all we have for you this week on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with you on Monday.